interventions to help individuals with high blood sugar and or diabetes. So I'd like to talk first about the disease of diabetes and some of the consequences of high blood sugar to begin with. When we look at diabetes, we're going to talk about type 2 diabetes. 90% of the cases of diabetes in the United States are type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes generally strikes individuals when they are children or in their teen years, and it is an autoimmune disease in which the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas are increasingly destroyed. So it's a different type of disease, even though the result of the inability to manage blood sugar is the same consequence. Type 2 diabetes develops more slowly over time, although we are seeing it at younger and younger ages. So when we look at type 2 diabetes, we notice in the normal pancreas, the pancreas makes insulin. Well, insulin needs to have a vehicle. It needs to be picked up by a car and driven to its destination, and that is the job of insulin. So the insulin picks up the blood sugar, the glucose, and carries it to its destination. So blood sugar itself just continues to wander around the highway of our bloodstream until insulin picks it up as a vehicle and drives it into the cell where it is utilized as energy. Now, when people become increasingly diabetic, when they increasingly have difficulty with their pancreas, they start to produce less insulin. So it's a consequence. There's more sugar in the bloodstream, more glucose in the blood, but fewer cars to drive it in, and then something else bad happens. Less and less glucose gets moved into the cells. So ironically, type 2 diabetes is a disease of starvation. Very often, not always, so some people that are very slender have type 2 diabetes, but very often we see that obesity and overweight is one of the complicating factors in this disease. And so these individuals look like they have plenty of available resources on them, but in truth, they are starving to death, because if the blood sugar cannot get inside the cell, then the cell starts to starve, and that's when we see some of these really nasty consequences of hyperglycemia and prediabetes and diabetes. So when I'm talking to individuals about this, I say it's like having a garage door opener. People with type 2 diabetes, their garage door opener is more and more on the fritz. Sometimes it works, but it works less and less often. So sometimes they can drive their car into the garage, but most of the time they cannot. And as the disease progresses, it gets to a point where only maybe one time out of 20 does the garage door opener get, opening the garage so that the sugar can reach its destination into the cell where it can be utilized as fuel. Now, some of the reasons that we're dealing with type 2 diabetes has to do with the changes in our food supply. In the 1700s, for example, the average sugar intake from all sources was about 4 pounds a year. In the 1800s, about 18 pounds a year. In the 1900s, we saw a dramatic shift, up to 100 pounds of sugar consumed every year, and now in 2016, on average, 150 pounds of sugar every single year. So this has been a short span of time compared to our bodies. You know, our bodies developed in very, very basic times. There were no processed foods. There were fruits and vegetables, and there was the mastodon that the early hunters were able to hunt down and bring down with their spears, working as a group. And so everybody had mastodon steaks to their heart's content until they were able to bring down another big animal. So we developed in times, our bodies lived for hundreds of thousands of years being attuned to a certain type of diet. And now in the short space of a couple hundred years, which is a wink of an eye in geological time, in a very short period of time, our bodies are now living in a whole new world. So we're caveman bodies living in a modern world with extreme exposure to sugar stressors that our body just doesn't know how to deal with. So it's really no wonder to me that we're starting to see some serious breakdowns in the system. Now, when we look at where is that sugar coming from, well, refined sugar is the majority of the sugar that we are dealing with, but high fructose corn syrup is certainly playing a role. In fact, you know, we see that the annual consumption per person of high fructose corn syrup is more than 40 pounds a year. Most of that comes via soft drinks, and via other sweetened beverages. And we also have other corn sweeteners that play a role. Honey and edible syrups are very, very low on the list. The vast majority of our problems are coming from refined sugar and high fructose corn syrup. Additionally, we have a huge amount of carbohydrates in our diet. For one thing, carbohydrates are less expensive. So it is cheaper to buy a bread and chips and a box of cereal than it is to buy milk and salmon and butter and coconut oil. So when we look at we see this encroaching carbs. We get more and more carbs in our diet. Now, carbohydrates, especially when they're refined carbohydrates, convert very easily into blood sugar. So when you take in sugar, you are directly feeding blood sugar. When you take in refined carbohydrates, there's a little transition step where that starch gets broken down into, you guessed it, sugar, and it's absorbed as sugar. When you're dealing with complex carbohydrates, like your grains that still have the fiber attached, and those types of, and then it slows the process down, and it's not quite as difficult on the body. But in essence, even those excellent raw carbohydrates that still have their fiber intact do eventually get transformed into sugars. Some of the consequences of high blood sugar. This is a really serious problem that's affecting almost 1 in 10 of every human being in the United States of America. And when we look at people with diabetes, of those 29 million, look at this one, peripheral artery disease. Almost 20, so 2/3 of Americans with diabetes are dealing with peripheral artery disease. Limited mobility. 10 million of that 29 million, so 1/3, dealing with limited mobility, vision impairment. When we look at that, again, 1 in 3 are dealing with kidney failure. In fact, diabetes is the #1 cause of the need for a kidney transplant in America. Depression, diabetes, because diabetes puts you in a chronic inflammatory state, and chronic inflammation is linked to disruption of neurotransmitters in the brain, high levels of depression in individuals with diabetes. So we look at every single one of these diseases for which we see some of these implications of hyperglycemia. It really does set you up for a lot of very unhealthy consequences. The best thing that you can do to avoid these consequences are to get the levels of inflammation down and get the blood sugar levels back closer to normal. Now, when we measure blood sugars, there's more than one way to measure blood sugar. And a lot of you have heard of fasting blood glucose or fasting blood sugar. That's when you get up in the morning and you don't eat anything at all and you haven't had anything in your tummy for 12 hours and they prick your finger or they draw some blood and they check it to see what your blood sugar level is. So that's your fasting blood sugar. The trouble is that fasting blood sugar is like a snapshot. So it takes a picture of you in the moment. So, for example, this lady here on our slide, for those of you that are attending via computer, is leaping into the air, and there's a quick snapshot. Now, if I were to judge her activity, I would think that this woman could fly, or levitate. That if I were to make a judgment about everything that happens with this woman based on one photo, I would say, wow, she's up in the air, so she must always be up in the air. That's the trouble with the fasting blood glucose. It's a quick snapshot. So it could be unusually low one morning for some unrelated reason, and you'll miss that you're having blood sugar issues, or it could be unusually high one morning for some reason, and you will think that a person has blood sugar issues when they don't necessarily. So, yes, I guess it is important to check for fasting blood glucose, but I prefer, when we're dealing with people with diabetes, to check the hemoglobin A1C. Now, this is a protein in the red blood cells that carries oxygen throughout the body, and it is joined to glucose. So when you look at your levels, it's often abbreviated, but when you look at your hemoglobin A1C levels, you'll see what has been going on with blood sugar over a longer period of time. So I said this is like a movie. When you take a hemoglobin A1C level, because it doesn't just show you the snapshot of what's happening in the moment, it looks back in time over a period of time and shows you the activity of the blood sugar levels. So to me, changes in hemoglobin A1C are more indicative of a worsening of the disease or an improvement of the disease than our fasting blood sugars. So when we look at how to measure or how to diagnose individuals. Normal fasting blood sugar is 99 or below, or a hemoglobin A1C of about 5. So individuals in this range are seldom having too much difficulty with their blood sugar. Now, there's this group called pre-diabetics. Now, there are integrative practitioners that will argue with you that there is no such thing as pre-diabetes, that even pre-diabetes sets you up for an increase in adverse effects that are related to hyperglycemia or high blood sugar levels. However, there are also individuals who argue that this is separate from diabetes and is more easily reversed. So fasting blood sugar is above 100, so it's no longer in the normal range, but it's under 125, and the hemoglobin A1C is 5.7 to 6.4. This is the perfect interventional time period. If you can catch someone here and keep them from going to full diabetes, that's actually the best time to catch, although there's still many things we can do even when people have progressed to full-on diabetes, which is a consistent fasting blood sugar of 126 or a hemoglobin A1C of 6.5 or above. Now, the importance of this hemoglobin A1C, which you've heard me say over and over now, but when we look at this 6.5, if you can get a 1-point decrease in your hemoglobin A1C levels. So let's say that you're at 6. If you can get that 6 down to 5, you have an almost 20% reduction in your risk for cataracts. You have a 16% reduction in your risk for heart failure. And you have a whopping 43% less risk of amputation or death from peripheral vascular disease. So this is a disease where even modest changes can have brilliant, lifelong improvements and quality changes. So what else can happen with blood sugar rises? Some of the other consequences of having blood sugar outside the realm of normal, heart and blood vessel disease, so coronary artery disease, angina, heart attack, stroke, atherosclerosis, and high blood pressure are all related to higher levels of blood sugar. Why is that? Well, because excess levels of sugar in the bloodstream irritate the heck out of the inside of your blood vessels. It's like dragging sandpaper across your wooden walls. You know, you've got all this sugar that's circulating in the bloodstream, and the body has adapted to dealing with certain amounts. But if you start to get higher and higher levels, that irritates the lining of the blood vessel, and what happens when we get irritated? We start to get inflamed. Sometimes we even see damage to the lining of the blood vessel, and that inflammation narrows the opening of the artery, and the ongoing damage, the body starts to put Band-Aids on that damage. And what does it use for Band-Aids? Calcium and cholesterol. So we start to see calcifications and atherosclerotic plaque developing on the inside of the arteries to try to cover up those areas that are affected by that are affected by the irritation from the high levels of blood sugar. We see nerve damage because you have impaired circulation to the nerves, and this can cause tingling and numbness and burning and pain in the fingers and in the toes, and it can spread upwards. Some people with diabetic neuropathy feel that they are walking on broken glass, or they feel like they're being stung by bees. Very, very difficult and painful sensations. It can also lose feeling to affected limbs. So if someone who has progressed to the point where they've had nerve damage, that their nerves are no longer transmitting that pain signal, it makes them more open to damage to their lower limbs and risks of serious infections that can lead to amputation. In men, this nerve damage can lead to erectile dysfunction, and for everyone it can also, when we talk about damage to the nerves that control digestion, it can end up with nausea, vomiting, abnormal transfer of the food through the gastrointestinal tract that can result in diarrhea and constipation. It could cause kidney damage that ends up requiring a dialysis or a kidney transplant. Eye damage, leading cause of preventable blindness in America is high levels of blood sugar that damage the blood vessels of the retina. It's called diabetic retinopathy. We already talked a little bit about foot damage, and this may surprise you. People with high levels of blood sugar are at greater risk for hearing impairment because of the reduced blood vessel nourishment of the nerves, the auditory nerves that carry those signals from our ears to our brain. Now, we all may know about some of the lifestyle interventions the standard American diet, as I said, 50% carbs. You know, TerryTalksNutrition.com has a diet listed, which is the Paleo diet that Terry Limeron follows. Terry Limeron, a leader in integrative health and natural medicine, believes that this is, and many other experts believe that the healthier blood sugar diet is predominantly fats, a goodly amount of protein, and a much smaller amount of carbohydrates. And this has been shown time and again to help even out blood sugar level, so you don't get the spikes and the drops, so you get a more even-keeled blood sugar level. That is true that this can make a huge difference. Not everybody is comfortable with this. This is a dramatic dietary shift. But even a small bit of movement, let's say you get those carbs down to 40% and bump up the protein, a little bit more fat, can result in improvements in how the body manages blood sugar. A 2010 study found that just losing 15 pounds. Now, a lot of people that are, let's say a person's 200 pounds and their ideal weight's 150, and they look at that 50-pound goal and think, oh, my God, I haven't weighed that since I was 13 years old. No way can I ever achieve that. Even small changes in weight can have great improvements in our control of our blood sugar. So a 2010 study found losing 15 pounds and walking 30 minutes a day reduced your risk of type 2 diabetes by a whopping 58%. And resistance strength training for 10 weeks. So this would be lifting weights or kettlebells. So when you do resistance training, lowered hemoglobin A1C levels almost a full percentage point in men with type 2 diabetes. And as you recall from our previous discussion, 1 point lowering of the hemoglobin A1C, like from a 6 to a 5 or a 7 to a 6, has incredible improvements in your long-term health outcomes. So now let's move into some of the botanicals that can play a huge role in helping people who have difficulty with managing their blood sugar levels, whether they're in the pre-diabetic state or if they have full-out type 2 diabetes. There are botanicals that, along with lifestyle changes, can really set you up for success. And my favorite, and the first one listed, is called Hinto Nia Lotta Flora. Now, Hinto Nia is native to Mexico and Central America, and it's been used there in herbal teas and tonics, but scientists in Germany over 60 years ago became very interested in this herb because it has a compound in it called deuterogenin that they've found is a very effective treatment for diabetes. So what they did was they worked for several years to refine this and turn this into a medicine in Europe. So this is a medicine that doctors prescribe in Europe for people who have prediabetes or for people who have full-out type 2 diabetes. And it is especially useful, as I said, it's easier to help reverse diabetes before you get to a point where you're having very high hemoglobin A1Cs and very high ongoing blood sugar levels. It's easier to reverse it at prediabetes, but actually at any stage of the disease, this can be a very useful intervention. In one study of 178 people with type 2 diabetes and prediabetes, they received the Hinto Nia Lotta Flora plus their regular diabetic protocol, and that could be diet changes, oral medication, or insulin. They found that it drove down the hemoglobin A1C a whopping 10%, fasting blood glucose down 23%, but what was more important, this was an 8-month study, the diabetic complications and adverse events associated with high blood sugar levels were reduced 73%. And those are things like the GI symptoms of the nausea and the vomiting, or the interrupted correct gastrointestinal food transit, neuropathies, burning, prickling, itching, sweating, a lot of the things that are associated with having high blood sugar levels, they were able to reduce by 73%. At the end of the study, nearly half of the participants had reduced or eliminated, of the people that were using medication, were able to reduce their medication or stop using their medication entirely. In another study, 32 people with type 2 diabetes, and these are individuals that the doctors had tried to control their blood sugar levels with diet alone. So they made these relatively dramatic changes in their diet, and they failed. They were, even with the dietary changes, they still had problematic hemoglobin A1C levels. In this one, they found that at baseline, their average was about almost 7.5. After 3 months of using this specialized extract of Hinto Nia Lotta Flora, they brought it down to just a bit above 7, and at 6 months, they had brought it down to just a little more than 6.6. So very dramatic decreases. The longer the product was used, the longer people use this herbal medicine, the better their hemoglobin A1C levels. And remember, a 1-point decrease is an almost 20% risk in cataracts, 16% reduction in heart failure, and 43% less risk of amputation or death from peripheral vascular issues. So it's a very, very safe intervention. That's one of the things that I like about botanicals. In this instance, no matter that individuals were using this, it never takes the blood sugar too low. You know, that's one of the problems with diabetic medication. If you, let's say you are using an oral blood sugar lowering product from the medication world, and you're kind of queasy that day and you don't eat enough, well, it can drive your blood sugar very low and cause some potentially life-threatening adverse effects. They have never noted low blood sugar about on anyone using Hinto Nia. And as I said, it's been on the market in Europe for over 50 years, 60 years of research. Patients in some of these studies have been followed as long as 3 years with no adverse results detected. So it's a much safer intervention. The sooner it's used, the better it works, but you can use it at any stage. It has been tested in conjunction with insulin and oral anti-diabetic medications, but these were under the oversight of their physician, so we always encourage people to please keep your physician informed, because there may come a time when you need to reduce your medication because your blood sugar levels are being better balanced by using the Hinto Nia extract. The dosage is about 20 milligrams of the polyphenolic compounds from Hinto Nia 1 to 3 times a day. The clinical studies were done on 3 times a day, 1 with each meal. And they blended it with just a few essential vitamins and minerals, but the heavy lifting comes from the Hinto Nia. For some individuals who are pre-diabetic, may choose to only use 1 or 2 per day. For people who have more serious issues, I would definitely use the same dose that was used in the clinical studies of 3 per day, 1 with each meal. Now, another excellent intervention for people who are having difficulties with insulin resistance, hyperglycemia, pre-diabetes, and type 2 diabetes is curcumin. High blood sugar is a metabolic risk factor. So when we look at people who have abdominal and obesity, and sometimes you've probably heard this before, apple shape versus pear shape. You know, it's never a good idea to be overweight, but if you're going to be overweight, it's a lot safer and healthier to be overweight from the waist down. A lot harder to lose weight off of the bottom and off of the thighs, harder to lose, but when you carry it around the waist, that increases your risk for lots of cardiovascular complications and insulin resistance. So when we look at metabolic risk factors, it increases your risk of heart attack, diabetes, and stroke. So when we look at using curcumin in a study of 240 participants who had fasting blood sugar levels between 100 and 124 and hemoglobin A1C levels of about 5.7 to 6.4. So these are individuals that would be classified as early diabetes or pre-diabetes. We see that in the placebo group, their average blood sugar continued to rise over the course of 9 months. And by the end of the study, 16% of the people in the placebo group were in full-on type 2 diabetes, versus curcumin, at the end of 9 months, they had a whopping 20% reduction in their average fasting blood glucose and hemoglobin A1C levels, which shows us that the ongoing use of curcumin can really help to bring down those blood sugar levels. And in this study, no one in the curcumin group became diabetic, so it was an excellent prevention. It also works to protect the body from the adverse effects of high blood sugars. So when we look, as remember what I said is the irritation of the sugar in the bloodstream that leads to chronic inflammation, inflammation in the liver, inflammation in the kidneys, inflammation in the blood vessels. Well, when they looked at an animal model of diabetes, they saw that curcumin can reduce 60% reduction in blood sugar levels, but also dramatically protect the liver and the kidneys of the adverse effects of the high blood sugar levels. So when they looked at the levels of oxidative stress, the curcumin-treated group was almost able to cut, not quite, but almost in half, the level of damage to the liver and to the kidneys for those that were supplemented with curcumin. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't pay attention to your diet or activity and just take curcumin. However, some individuals have so many difficulties with their pancreas and with their insulin production and insulin resistance that it's very hard for them to get perfect control of their blood sugars. And there are individuals who have pretty good control 60 or 70% of the time, but they still have some blood sugar spikes periodically. This is a nice insurance policy to have on board, that even if you do have occasional issues with blood sugar spikes or your blood sugars are hard to get, they're very movable, and some days they're good and some days they're bad, it helps to protect your tissues from the adverse effects of those high levels of blood sugar. It's also very useful for metabolic syndrome because it improves every single factor associated with that metabolic syndrome. It's been shown to be as powerful as prescription drugs at reducing inflammation. It's also been shown to protect against dietary-induced insulin resistance, to reduce blood sugar and blood pressure levels, and to raise the HDL levels of cholesterol, which are cardioprotective. So some things we need to know about curcumin, because there's a lot of confusion out there. Curcumin has been an enormously successful natural medicine, and so its sales have increased dramatically. The research on curcumin is exploding. We see a lot about it on TV and on some of the health shows and in magazines, but people get very confused between turmeric and curcumin. Turmeric and curcumin are not the same thing. Turmeric is a great herb. It's a wonderful spice, and if you like the flavor of turmeric, I hope you're adding it to your food because it's an excellent and healthy spice. Turmeric is a brilliant yellow-orange color, and what gives turmeric that color is curcumin. Curcumin is actually a pigment, but there's very little curcumin in turmeric. In fact, only 2% to 5% of turmeric is curcumin, and so you cannot achieve the amount used in some of these really dramatic clinical trials that showed such improvement. You can't get there with turmeric. You would have to take literally hundreds of capsules every single day. So you really need to move to curcumin. Curcumin and turmeric are both poorly absorbed. So the form that I think is very beneficial and the kind that's used in many of these inflammation studies that we've discussed is a curcumin blended with turmeric essential oil in a patented process that binds the two together. The dosage used was 750 milligrams of the curcumin plus the turmeric oil, which is about 500 milligrams of curcuminoids daily. But for individuals who are really struggling with blood sugar, I would go up to twice daily. So mild issues once daily, more serious issues twice daily. And I like to take curcumin with meals, not because it upsets the stomach, but because I believe there are factors in foods that may help it absorb even a little bit better. Last but certainly not least, I want to talk about grapeseed extract. Grapeseed extract is a really powerful natural intervention to help individuals who are struggling with keeping their blood sugars in a healthy range. In a 4-week study, they saw dramatic reductions in blood sugar levels, and again, with grapeseed extract, you never see that it takes the blood sugar levels too low. So, for example, in this animal model of diabetes, the control group that did not have diabetes, blood sugar was right at about 100. In those that developed diabetes, their blood sugar levels were getting up around 425. But you'll see that when they were treated with a grapeseed extract, brought it down to about 110. So almost back to normal again. It also, when you use grapeseed extract, when you have diabetes, it also increases an antioxidant enzyme called glutathione peroxidase, which helps your glutathione stay active in the active form longer. And that's one of the challenges we see with people who have type 2 diabetes, especially those who have very poor control of their blood sugar levels, as they start to see diminishing amounts of glutathione made in the body, which is a very, very important antioxidant and also crucial to the detoxification process in the liver. It also reduces blood sugar spikes. So individuals who use grapeseed extract in an ongoing manner, if they do eat a very high-carb meal, it ameliorates some of the blood sugar spikes so you don't get that roller coaster effect. So in 8 healthy individuals, they were fed a high-carb meal, 74% carbs of the meal, or a high-carb meal plus 300 milligrams of grapeseed extract. And then they tested their blood glucose levels. And as you can see, the group that got tested with grapeseed extract had much lower levels compared to the group that did not. So, yes, it did cause a blood sugar spike, but it blunted the spike somewhat so you don't get the roller coaster effect. Grapeseed extract also reduces blood pressure, and one of the things we see with hyperglycemia and high levels of blood sugar is that it dramatically increases your risk for high blood pressure. So in 27 adults with full-on metabolic syndrome, so that's abdominal obesity, blood sugar difficulties, very unbalanced cholesterol levels, so high triglycerides, low healthy cholesterol, compared to placebo for 4 weeks. And we see that they had a big improvement in their blood pressure. So the systolic, which is the number on top, was reduced over 10 points. So that'd be like somebody at 130 went down to about 118. And the diastolic, which is the bottom number, was reduced a full 8 points. That's somebody that was maybe at 80 went down to 72. So these are really good improvements that protect against pressure in the blood vessels, and high pressure in the blood vessels make you more at risk for heart attack and stroke, because the blood vessels that feed these very sensitive tissues, if the blood pressure is high, can rupture or because of the irregularities on the lining of the blood vessel itself can trap a blood clot and cause the ischemia to a certain area of the body. There are challenges, however, with grapeseed extract. The active compounds are called OPC, oligomeric proanthocyanidins. But oligomeric proanthocyanidins, OPCs, these come in all sizes. So I jokingly say they can be Chihuahuas or they can be Great Danes. And if they're all Great Danes, no way are they going to be able to fit through the doggy door. You really want Chihuahuas in this case, because then they can all get through the doggy door with ease. High molecular weight OPCs do not absorb, and some of these are called tannins or polymeric proanthocyanidins. They still count on the label towards the label total. So if it says it's an 80% or a 60% or whatever the product says is an OPC, if the FDA were to run a test on it, it would say, yes, that's how many it contains. But that doesn't mean that's how many you'll absorb, because if they're all tannins, if they're all Great Danes, none of them are going to get through your doggy door. So it's important to look for tannin-free grapeseed. It's also important to look for the grapeseed that's standardized to contain only low molecular weight, 100% absorbable OPCs, because if you take a grapeseed product and it's all Great Danes, you're not going to get any benefits whatsoever. And that's one of the worst things that can happen in the dietary supplement industry, is to spend your money on something that does absolutely nothing for you. So for ongoing basic support for people with higher blood sugars or people in the pre-diabetic range, 400 milligram may suffice, 400 milligrams once a day. For individuals who are in more serious difficulties with their blood sugars, they're full-on into type 2 diabetes, I would say 800 to 1,200. So 400 milligrams twice a day or even 3 times a day might be a more optimal dosing to get them back into range. So in conclusion, small changes can lead to really big results. In another study of 523 overweight subjects with prediabetes, and they followed them for 3 years, losing just 5% of your body weight, so that's about 10 pounds for a 200-pound person, and exercising just 30 minutes a day and increasing fiber intake reduced the risk of type 2 diabetes, of developing it by 58%. So I think that individuals get overwhelmed with having so many factors that they need to control. Well, the doctors want me to completely upend my diet. I need to lose 75 pounds. I need to start having huge amounts of exercise. No. If you have the stamina and the motivation to do that, good for you. But the vast majority of people get overwhelmed with having so many changes thrown at them, especially individuals who have spent their whole life eating a diet that big food has dictated, and they aren't even sure how to eat any other way. I think that it's reassuring to know and important to know that tiny changes can lead to great long-term results. 5 pounds, 10 pounds, a little bit more exercise. Walk around the block every day. Just do that to start with, especially if you are dealing with some pain or if you already have type 2 diabetes and maybe you've got some nerve changes and some discomfort in your feet. Try just to do small amounts. Swimming, if people have difficulty, if they have type 2 diabetes and leg pain or peripheral neuropathies, then water exercise, and almost every city has a pool dedicated to therapeutic exercise, can work wonders for this. So the reassuring news is that by changing our diets, starting to eat more healthy, wholesome foods, walking away from the refined carbohydrates, getting a little bit more activity, and incorporating clinically proven supplements can lead to some dramatic improvements in blood sugar status that can help to prevent heart attacks, strokes, Alzheimer's disease. They're starting to call Alzheimer's disease diabetes of the brain because high blood sugar levels are such a risk factor for this disease. Peripheral vascular disease, blindness, hearing loss, erectile dysfunction. We can see such a dramatic improvement in being able to prevent these long-term consequences just by incorporating a few healthy practices into our lives. So thank you, everyone, for your very kind attention, and I think I'm going to turn it back over to Lexi because I think we have some questions.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. That was such great information, and you know, it's astonishing to think that almost 10% of the United States population is struggling with blood sugar issues. So I think that most of us who have listened, you know, have a family or friend that we had in mind during this presentation. And I know a lot of our listeners out there have probably heard us talk about curcumin and grapeseed, but we've had a lot of interest in the Hinto Nia that you were talking about. So if anyone wants additional information on Hinto Nia, you can send us an email at webinars, so ends with an S, at terrytalksnutrition.com. And we will get you some additional information as far as where to find that product here in the United States, since it is relatively new in the U.S. All right, so a lot of really great questions coming in our Q&A box here, so let's just go ahead and get started. So let's say someone is having some success taking Hinto Nia currently. What is the best way that they can start to get some of their prescription medications lowered?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, but that's where I think you need to work in conjunction with your health care practitioner. And I know the response to that is, well, my doctor doesn't really know anything about supplements or doesn't like dietary supplements. Most individuals who are on anti-diabetic medication are checking their blood sugar ongoing. And if they're starting to see more consistent reductions and talking to their doctor, it may be time to start to lower their dose. I would never recommend that anyone completely go off their medications without talking to their physician. But as I said, if you are checking your blood sugar levels anyway, if you notice that you used to be, even with medication, at 110 every day, and now all of a sudden you're at 90, maybe it's time to talk to your doctors. Can we come down on the dose a little bit? I think that's the safest way to do it. And I'm often asked about type 1 diabetes. Can people go off of insulin if they have type 1 diabetes? I wish this were the case, but it is not true. In type 1 diabetes, the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas have been destroyed, and so they need to supplement their body with insulin. Now, with type 1 diabetes, is it useful to be on curcumin and grapeseed? Absolutely, because it will help to forestall some of the unfortunate adverse events of having high blood sugar levels. But they don't need the Hinto Nia because the insulin is already taking care of their blood sugar.
All right, great. Thank you very much. And along those lines, as far as working with a practitioner, someone had a question. Their insulin was recently doubled about 6 months ago. They feel like they've gotten worse and caused weight gain. They want to know if they should see a new endocrinologist, or maybe, you know, would you think that finding more of an integrative practitioner might help them in their health goals?
Well, I'm sorry that I can't prescribe or offer you medical treatment because I don't know you personally and I don't know what's going on with your individual case or why this is happening. But I think it's always good to get another opinion. If you're not getting any better, if the medications keep going up but your symptoms are getting worse, it might be time to call in another opinion to see what's going on.
Great. And we also had a couple questions about, we know diet is really important when it comes to the development of diabetes, but have you also heard of things like emotional trauma and cortisol levels also potentially contributing to diabetes?
Well, they can certainly play a role because cortisol is what is released by our adrenal glands when we're under an extreme amount of stress. Like if a tiger jumps out at us, we get out into a dark parking lot, all of a sudden your hair is going to be standing on end. Well, part of cortisol's activity to try to save you in a life-threatening situation is to release a kind of sugar from the liver called glucagon, and so so that you have an enormous amount of energy in order to fight off the threat. A lot of people have a lot of psychological threats. Their bodies don't know the difference, and so they do have some issues with releasing abnormal amounts of sugar into the bloodstream. So I don't know if stress alone would cause type 2 diabetes, but it can certainly be one of the factors combined with some other things like some of the problems in our diet and exposure to high fructose corn syrup. There's also certain medications that make you more at risk for type 2 diabetes, and this is dumbfounding to me, but one of the most prescribed drugs in America, one of the classes of drugs, are cholesterol-lowering drugs. So your Lipitors and, that whole family, those are called statin drugs. And those drugs have been proven to dramatically increase your risk of type 2 diabetes. So we're coming at it from, we've had changes in our food system that our Stone Age bodies don't know how to process what we're throwing at them. We have high levels of psychological stress. And then in addition to all of that, one of the most prescribed drugs in America makes people more at risk for type 2 diabetes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Had a couple people ask about some other natural compounds that they may have tried for managing diabetes, things like berberine and cinnamon. Any thoughts on those as far as how they compare to some of the things we talked about today?
Well, I definitely think Hinto Nia is stronger than either berberine or cinnamon at bringing down those blood sugar levels and bringing down the hemoglobin A1C. Berberine also has a challenge with absorption. It's not readily absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract. I like cinnamon better, and I think that if people want to incorporate cinnamon either as a spice or as a supplement, it's an excellent add-on.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, I know you had mentioned that type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune issue, but someone was wondering, of the 3 products that you talked about today, which would be best for someone with type 2 diabetes, just, maybe for some anti-inflammatory support? Any thoughts on that?
Well, for type 1, I had said that both the curcumin and the grape seed extract would be very, very useful. It's hard for me. It's like asking me which of my children do I love the most. I love them all. I think that they're both awesome. If I had to pick one, I would probably pick curcumin because it has a little bit broader activity as far as the different types of system it touches in the body. But I would say that grapeseed extract is almost only 1% behind it. I mean, it's really close. It's almost 50-50 in my mind of which ones are best for individuals with type 1 diabetes. And additionally, curcumin is a fat-soluble antioxidant. Grapeseed extract is a water-soluble antioxidant. When you use the two together, you're covering all your bases. And so I think since both of them have really dramatic proven benefits for people with diabetes and for people who have chronic inflammatory problems or some of the healthcare sequelae that comes about as a result of having high blood sugar levels in the body, that if it's at all possible, I would use both.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now, we know with a lot of herbal products, we tend to see side benefits, which is great. So someone was wondering if Hinto Nia had any effect on cholesterol and triglyceride levels.
It may have some modest impact. It definitely has, not so much on the cholesterol, but on the triglycerides. Because when you bring down blood sugars, you generally bring down triglyceride levels as well, because triglycerides are a measure of ongoing levels of like sugar and carbohydrate exposure in the diet.
Excellent. All right, just going to check our Q&A box one more time here. Oh, and someone just wanted to know if they wanted to just take curcumin as a preventive, if they're, maybe a borderline pre-diabetic right now, what would you say would be a good maintenance dose for like a fairly healthy person as far as curcumin goes?
Well, if you don't have any risk factors for diabetes, I would say that, 375 milligrams with 250 milligrams of curcuminoids daily is a great add-on to your longevity protocol or your stay healthy protocol. If you are overweight, if you are struggling with your triglycerides, if your blood sugars are creeping up and they're at maybe 110, I would definitely go up to the clinically studied dose, which is 750 milligrams, at least once daily, maybe even twice daily.
Okay, great. And another question just came in about curcumin is, why is it important to find a curcumin with the turmeric essential oil?
For a couple of reasons. Number one, it boosts absorption. So instead of 20 capsules, you only have to take 2. Another issue has to do with the turmeric essential oil itself. It contains compounds called termerones, the most clinically studied of which is called A-R-termerone. So these termerones not only boost the absorption of the curcumin, but after it's absorbed, it energizes the curcumin. It makes the curcumin stronger and more beneficial. So they work very well together. But in addition to that, the termerones themselves have some very potent health impact. So the termerones from turmeric essential oil, which you don't find in curcumin, but the termerones themselves are anti-inflammatory. They have some anti-cancer properties as well. So that's why I think when you use the both together, it's like you're getting the best of everything turmeric has to offer in a more concentrated form.
Excellent. And the three ingredients you talked about today, a couple questions is, can these supplements all be combined? Are they safe to take together on a regular basis?
Absolutely, because they will never take your blood sugar too low. So I think that when you put them all together, it creates a highly effective natural protocol that, in conjunction with trying to make some changes to your diet, trying to eat a little healthier, trying to get a little movement into your life, that I think you'll see some real changes in. And not just your numbers when you go to the doctor, but how you feel on an everyday basis.
Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for all the great information. I don't want to keep you longer than our time is allotted, but great information, and thank you for help with all of the answering of questions, and it was just a phenomenal topic today. So,
well, thank you, Lexi, and I think I got a few private messages that people came in through a different pathway, and so one of them is that they have GI problems taking curcumin even with meals. Is there anything that would help? I'm not sure exactly what those GI problems might be. You could try taking it on an empty stomach. You could try taking a lower dose. You could, you could try to see if by taking it in different forms or different times of the day that it might be better for you. Most people do not. In fact, there are studies on curcumin showing that it helps to settle the stomach or reduce inflammation and burning and gastritis. So I'm not exactly sure how to answer that except to say try taking lower dosages more frequently throughout the day and see if that helps. And then I also, had another question, is it safe to take these if you have low blood sugar? I would not take Hinto Nia, Lotta, Flora, if you have low blood sugar, not because I'm afraid it's dangerous, but because I think it's wasting your money. If your blood sugars are already low, you don't need them. Curcumin and, curcumin blended with turmeric essential oil, tannin-free grapeseed extract, absolutely. Those are beneficial for so much more than, we're talking specifically about diabetes today, but they also have wonderful, as I said, this part of your longevity protocol, anti-cancer, anti-Alzheimer's, anti-heart disease. These are just some excellent basic supplements, if you can, to include in your health protocol every single day. So no worries whatsoever if you have low blood sugar.
And just a quick little side note, again, for anyone who wants, I'm getting a lot of questions about the Hinto Nia and where to purchase it, and also some of the research that Cheryl had mentioned. Please email, again, webinars@terrytalksnutrition.com, and we will provide you with the information that you are requesting.
All right, I'm just glancing through to make sure that I didn't miss anything in mine. Oh, here's a question about high-protein diet leading to a greater risk of kidney stones. Not so much kidney stones. Well, you know, but people do worry about eating a very high saturated fat diet leading to increased levels of uric acid, and high levels of uric acid are associated with both gout and certain kinds of kidney stones. I think if you're doing it, if you're eating reasonable portions and not overeating, if you're dealing with organic and grass-fed, I think that's a very big difference than eating, you know, Whoppers every day or quarter pounders with cheese, that different kinds of high fats. I don't think all fats are created equal. So when we look also at the like olive oils and coconut oils, so they're, you know, those are high fat, and we look at certain kinds of proteins that are out there that are not associated with kidney stones. So if you're prone to kidney stones, you might want to discuss with your practitioner, but I think if you're eating reasonable portions and a healthy diet, I wouldn't worry about it. It's also an interesting study, kidney stone reduction, increase your water, that they saw a dramatic decrease in people who had kidney stones that were prone to them just by adding more water to their daily intake. Like I think it was 6 more 8-ounce glasses a day, that it dramatically reduced their risk of kidney stones. All right, is there anything else, Lexi, that came through? I'm looking through my list to make sure I didn't miss anything.
I am not seeing anything, so hopefully everyone had their questions answered. And yes, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you for moderating for us, and thank you for handling all the technical parts of this. It's nice to be able to have this chance to talk to folks about something I feel pretty positively about, which is making sure that we get our blood sugar levels just as healthy as they possibly can be. So thanks.
All right, everyone, and we do have another event coming up in September. So it will be on Wednesday, September 28th at 9:30 a.m. Central Time. The topic will be Cancer Prevention in Our Hands, Not Our Genes, and Terry Lemeron will be our special guest. So please make sure and register for that event if you have not already. And today's event was recorded, and it will be uploaded to the Terry Talks Nutrition YouTube channel within the next day or two. We will send an email to everyone that attended today with that webinar recording link, and also reattach the handout, as there may have been a few folks who registered last minute and didn't receive the email with the handout. Please feel free to follow Terry on social media. He is all over the place, and he's always coming up with great things to share, inspirational quotes. So he does have a Twitter, so it's twitter.com/Terry Lemeron, and also the Terry Talks Nutrition Facebook page is a great resource, and the Terry Talks Nutrition website. You can go there, sign up for a free weekly newsletter. We do also have our archived webinars listed in that spot as well, and there is a spot where you can ask Terry your own personal health questions. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. Hopefully you learned some great information about managing blood sugar, and until we meet again, good health to you. Bye-bye.